It's like standing in the middle of some forgotten war zone. But that's impossible!
Turn it off!
We are not where we're supposed to be. They were lost in a place that shouldn't exist, surrounded by remnants of forgotten war. Instructor! Kyle said, his voice barely audible above the rain. This isn't just another anomaly, is it?
Make it stop!
Lights flickered on in long dead sensor arrays, and joints that had been frozen for centuries began to creak and groan as they moved. Before them stretched a landscape that could easily come up in a fever dream. Rolling hills extended as far as the eye could see, their surfaces scarred by ancient battles. But it is what stood upon these hills that truly arrested their attention. Massive forms of towering figures rising like mountain peaks above the terrain. Colossal shapes of metal and decay, some standing proud despite the rusted joints, others lying fallen, half buried in the earth. The sky opened up, unleashing a torrent of rain. Heavy droplets pelted down, quickly turning the ground beneath their feet into treacherous swamp. The air seemed to intensify the acrid smell in the air, bringing with it the earthly scent of wet soil and rusted metal. Water cascaded off enormous frames of fallen giants, creating waterfalls that carved new paths through the mud. Kyle's boots sank ankle-deep into the soggy ground with each step, the mud making a wet, sucking sound as he tried to move. Rivulets of muddy water coursed down the hillsides, carving new paths through the already pockmarked earth. Here and there, patches of scrubby grass clung tenaciously to the soil, bowing under the weight of a relentless downpour. Joan's eyes widened in recognition, while Kyle and Liara stared in confused awe. They could now make out more details: gargantuan limbs, thick as ancient tree trunks, domed heads bristling with corroded sensor arrays, and cavernous chest cavities exposed to the elements. Liara wiped the rain from her eyes, her hair plastered to her forehead.
It's like standing in the middle of some forgotten war zone.
She had to shout to be heard over the constant drumming of rain on metal and earth. Her words almost swallowed by crack of thunder that rolls across the sodden landscape.
Impossible,
Johan finally muttered, his face a mask of disbelief, rain streaming down his weathered features and dropping from his chin.
This looks like a War Strider cemetery. But how?
His voice was nearly lost in the roar of the rain and the hollow boom of the water striking massive metal hulls. Liara glanced at Johan, her brow furrowed, wiping water from her eyes as it continued to pile down relentlessly.
Hey, what cemetery? What are these things, sir?
Johan looked grimly at the scene before them, his improvised stone leg sinking deeper into the mud with each labored step.
This is what is left of War Striders,
he replied, his eyes scanning the rain-soaked hills.
Ultimate weapon used during the War of Shattered Realms. They've been obsolete for generations now.
He paused, his brow furrowing deeper.
This shouldn't exist. Not here, not anywhere in the Expanse. The cemeteries are located only in remote, uninhabited and hardly accessible areas outside the Expanse, in the mainland of Leora. The war machines were never brought into the Forbidden Expanse. This place wasn't even accessible during the War of Shattered Realms.
The nearest War Strider, a colossal quadrupedal behemoth, was easily the size of a small building. Its once gleaming hull was now a patchwork of corrosion. The machine's legs, thick as ancient tree trunks, were locked in wide stands, as if it had been frozen mid-stride. Its head, a dome-like structure, bristling with remnants of sensors and weapon mounts, was slumped forward, giving the machine an air to defeat. Another War Strider, this one bipedal, lay on its side nearby. Its humanoid form was eerily reminiscent of a fallen giant. One massive arm was outstretched, skeletal figures the size of support beams, grasping at nothing. The chest cavity had been torn open, whether by some ancient battle or by the ravages of time. It was unclear. It was revealing a tangle of corroded machinery. Throughout the cemetery, other war striders could be seen in various configurations. Some spider-like with multiple legs, others more conventional in design. All bore the scars of battle and time, their hulls punctured, limbs missing, and internal systems exposed to the elements. As a gust of wind swept through the cemetery, it carried with a sound, a low, mournful keen that seemed to emanate from warsiders themselves, as if the ancient machines were lamenting their fate in this impossible place. Kyle, his curiosity piqued despite the grim surroundings, turned to Johan. The War of Shattered Realms? I've never heard of it. What was it? Johan sighed heavily, the weight of history seeming to press down on his shoulders along with a relentless rain. He ran a hand through his soaked hair, his eyes distant, as if seeing ghosts from the past.
I always forget that you are just children.
He muttered more to himself than to them. Then, raising his voice to be heard over the storm, he began to explain.
The War of Shattered Realms was a catastrophe that nearly destroyed our world. It was a conflict so vast and devastating that it reshaped continents and toppled empires.
Lightning flashed, illuminating the rusted hulks around them as Johan continued.
It was war fought for control over Arcanite and magical supremacy. Nations turned on each other, alliances crumbled, and the very fabric of reality was strained by the magic unleashed.
He gestured towards the towering wrecks.
And this were the ultimate weapons of that war. War Striders. Massive, Arcanite power war machines that could level cities and decimate armies. They were unstoppable juggernauts, combining the most advanced technology with the most potent battle magics.
Johan's voice grew grim.
The War Striders brought unparalleled destruction. They trampled forests, vaporized mountains, and turned fertile plains into wastelands. Millions died in their wake. But in the end, they couldn't prevent the collapse of the very nations that created them.
He shook his head, water cascading through his bristle.
When the dust settled, the known world was gone. Empires had fallen, entire regions were inhabitable, and the survivors were left to rebuild a changed world. That's why most of you never heard of it. It's the past we've tried hard to forget, even as we live with its consequences every day.
The rain seemed to intensify as Johan fell silent, the pounding of water on metal and earth underscoring the weight of his words. Kyle and Liera exchanged stunned glances, the enormity of what they just learned sinking in. The rusted giants looming over them now seemed even more ominous, silent witnesses of a history of unimaginable destruction. As Johan finished his grim explanation, a sudden, intense buzzing pierced through the sound of the rain. Liera jumped, startled by the noise coming from a device in her hands. Her eyes widened as she stared at the readout, panic evident in her voice.
The scanner!
She shouted over the rain and the device's insistent buzzing.
It's going completely haywire! Even worse than in a cavern where we fought the beast. It's saying we're in the middle of a massive Nexolite deposit, but that's impossible!
Turn it off! Once overloaded, it can explode!
Johan shouted. Frantically, Liera began shutting down the device, her fingers fumbling with the controls, and the Magitech device went silent. Kyle felt a chill run down his spine. Despite the warm rain soaking through his clothes, he surveyed their surroundings once more, his gaze sweeping over the enormous structures that stood like ancient sentinels. Try as he might, he could see no sign of Nexolite, no glowing veins, no crystallite formations, nothing but mud, rain, and rusted metal. We are not where we're supposed to be, Kyle said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow audible even through the downpour. The cavern, it's like it sped us out somewhere else entirely. But more than that, this place, it doesn't make sense. Where's the Nexolite the scanner detected? There's nothing here but this ancient war machines. He looked to Johan and Liera, seeing his own confusion and fear reflected in their rain-streaked faces. The Ghost Rider cemetery was bizarre enough, but Viscana's readings added another layer of invisibility to their situation. The dissonance between what their eyes could see and what their equipment detected was profoundly unsettling. Johan's brow furrowed deeply, his eyes darting between the deactivated scanner and their perplexing surroundings.
This doesn't add up,
he muttered, loud enough for others to hear.
No visible Nexalite, yet the strongest reading we've ever encountered. It's as if...
He trailed off, unable to find words to express the sheer impossibility of their situation. The team stood in stunned silence, relentless rain emphasizing the gravity of their predicament. They were lost in a place that shouldn't exist, surrounded by remnants of forgotten war, with their only reliable piece of equipment telling them something their eyes vehemently denied. The extreme confusion was palpable, hanging in the air, as heavy as the rain that poured down upon them. Kyle stood motionless for a moment, his eyes fixed on a landscape around them. Slowly, he turned to Johan, his brow furrowed in deep thought.
Instructor!
Kyle said, his voice barely audible above the rain.
This isn't just another anomaly, is it?
Johan looked at him quizzically.
What do you mean? We've seen plenty of anomalies before.
Kyle continued, gesturing at their surroundings.
But the scanner never went haywire like this. It never detected Nexalite during those encounters. So why now? What's different about this place?
Johan's expression grew grave as he considered Kyle's words. He ran a hand through his rain-soaked hair, his eyes scanning the impossible terrain around them.
You're right,
Johan admitted after a long pause.
This is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it in all my years in the Expanse.
Kyle noticed something else, a detail that had been nagging at the back of his mind.
There's something else too. Don't you feel it? Or rather, don't you feel the lack of it?
Johan looked at him confused.
What do you mean? The pressure,
Kyle explained.
The constant pressure from the Expanse, it's gone. As if something is shielding us from it.
Johan's eyes widened in realization.
It's true. I can't feel its influence. It's like we're cut off from it somehow,
he said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. They stood in silence for a moment, the implications of this realization sinking in. Finally, Johan spoke, his voice barely breaking through the ravaging weather.
Cadets, I have no idea what's happening here. In all my years, I've never encountered anything like it. It's as if...
He trailed off, his gaze sweeping over the looming Ghost Riders and the rain-soaked landscape.
As if what?
Liara prompted, dreading the answer. Johan turned to her, his face pale despite the warm rain.
As if we are not just near the Nexalite deposit. As if we are inside it. As if the entire place, everything we see, is somehow part of the Nexalite itself. I have no other explanation. It's insane even for the Expanse.
The words hung in the air between them, almost tangible in their weight. Kyle and Liara exchanged a look of shared understanding and fear, both realizing that they had stumbled into something far beyond their capabilities.
So we are not just in the wrong place,
Kyle said slowly.
We are in a place that couldn't exist at all.
The realization added a new layer of uncertainty to their already precocious situation. They hadn't just been transported to another location. They have somehow stepped into a reality that completely crushed their understanding of what they could possibly expect within the Expanse. As this understanding settled over them, and you, if the Expanse could manifest something that shouldn't be there according to all logic and laws of nature, what are the limits? Does it have any? And more importantly, how could they hope to navigate their way back to the world they knew when the very fabric of reality seemed to fool them around? As Johan's ominous words faded into the air, the rain suddenly ceased. The abrupt silence was jarring, the absence of constant drumming leaving an almost palpable void. Kyle blinked, shaking water from his eyes. As he did, a faint whisper tickled the edge of his consciousness. He turned, trying to locate the source, but saw only Johan and Liara, both looking as confused as he felt by sudden change in the weather.
Did you hear that?
Kyle asked, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Johan and Liera exchanged puzzled glances.
Hear what?
Liera asked. Before Liera could respond, the whisper came again, louder this time. It was joined by another, then another, a cacophony of voices building in his mind. Some whispered, some shouted, some seemed to sing in the languages he couldn't understand. The voices grew louder, more insistent, drowning out everything else. Kyle's hands flew to his head, his fingers digging into his scalp.
Make it stop.
He gasped, his eyes wide with panic.
The voices, they are too loud.
Liera reached out, concern etched on her face.
Kale, what voices? We can't hear anything.
But Kyle couldn't respond. The voices had become raw, an overwhelming tsunami of sound that threatened to tear his mind apart. He fell to his knees, mind spluttering around him. The pain was excruciating, as if his head was caught between the hammer and an anvil, each voice another blow, threatening to shatter his skull.
Make it stop!
Kyle screamed, his voice raw with agony. He writhed on the ground, oblivious to the mud and concerned shouts of his companions. All he could perceive was the relentless assault of voices, each one seeming to carry a weight of entire world. As Kyle fell to the ground, Johan and Liera stood by, their faces etched with helpless concern, watching in horror as Kyle thrashed and screamed, fighting against the enemy they couldn't hear or see.
What's happening to him?
Liera asked, her voice trembling.
Should we try to restrain him?
Johan shook his head.
I'm not sure that would help. This isn't physical alignment.
Then what is it?
Liera pressed, her eyes never leaving Kyle's thrashing form. Johan was silent for a moment, considering.
It's possible that his weak seed might actually be the cause. Our stronger seeds might be unconsciously filtering out whatever he is experiencing. Without that protection, he's exposed to, well, whatever this place is truly broadcasting.
Suddenly, Kyle's body went limp, the tension draining from his muscles. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dazed.
They're gone.
He mumbled weakly.
The voices. They left.
Johan and Liera exchanged relieved glances, but their relief was short-lived. Kyle's eyes widened as he looked past them, a new horror dawning on his face.
The Ghost Riders!
He cried out, his voice hoarse from screaming.
Look!
Johan and Liera whirled around, following Kyle's gaze. What they saw made their blood run cold. The massive, rusted forms of Ghost Riders were coming to life. Lights flickered on in long dead sensor arrays, and joints that had been frozen for centuries began to creak and groan as they moved. The ground trembled as the nearest quadruped Ghost Rider took a ponderous step forward, each movement accompanied by the screech of protesting metal. Others were rising too, their immense forms casting lone shadows over the muddy ground. Johan stared at the impossible sight, his face a mask of disbelief and exasperation.
Are you kidding me?
He exclaimed, his voice a mix of fear and frustration.
As if the place wasn't insane enough already!
The Ghost Riders continued to awaken around them, the air filled with the sound of grating gears and creaking metal, a mechanical orchestra hurling a new, terrifying phase of their ordeal.